A 5-year-old girl vanished from her bed one autumn night in 1991, leaving behind only an open window and a silence that shattered a family. For 9 long years, her mother lived with the haunting belief that the greatest secret of her life was the unanswered question of whether her daughter, Maya, was still alive or already gone. By the year 2000, as she packed up the remnants of a failed marriage, she was finally ready to leave the ghosts of her old life behind. But a strange impulse, and the family's aging dog, led her to a dusty, long-forgotten toy and uncovered a truth far more terrifying than anything she could have imagined. Before we dive in, if you enjoy mysteries like this one, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I love seeing how far these quiet stories can travel. Now, let's head to Portland, Oregon, and follow the very first clue. Mark knelt beside her, securing another box. His movements were still careful, methodical, the way he did everything. A skilled carpenter at 45, his hands were still strong, but his eyes no longer met hers. They belonged to someone else now. "This one's ready," Amelia said, her voice a dry rasp. She pushed a box filled with her nursing textbooks and old college keepsakes toward him. "I'll take it out," Mark replied, his tone flat, polite to the point of being insulting. He lifted the heavy box with an ease that belied his slender frame. Amelia watched him go. The betrayal, when it came, hadn't been a sudden storm. It was a hairline crack, silently spreading until the entire foundation gave way. 6 months ago, Mark had confessed. Another woman, younger, someone who didn't carry the unbearable weight of a missing child. He was tired, he'd said. He needed to feel alive again. He wanted a divorce. And Amelia, exhausted from fighting her own demons, had no strength left to hold on. They had tried. After Maya disappeared, they had clung to each other like drowning victims. But grief had different shapes. Mark had retreated to his grief counseling sessions and his workshop in the basement. Amelia had thrown herself into double shifts at the hospital, working until physical exhaustion silenced the questions that tormented her every night. Why her? I should have been home. I should have checked the damn window lock. Now it was over. The house would belong to Mark and his new life. She would move to a small apartment near the hospital, a place with no memories, no ghosts. She glanced across the living room. In the corner, Buddy, their old golden retriever, lay motionless. Buddy had been Maya's 4th birthday present, once a boisterous ball of golden fur. Now his coat was dull, his eyes clouded with age, and he spent most of his days as a silent, furry witness to the slow decay of their family. For 9 years, he'd become withdrawn, developing a strange habit. Sometimes, he would quietly disappear for hours, slipping through a gap under the rickety fence that separated their yard from Mr. Henderson's abandoned property next door. The old widower had passed away 3 years ago, and his house, along with its dilapidated shed, was now being slowly swallowed by overgrown weeds. Amelia had always assumed Buddy was just finding a quiet place to nap, a refuge from the oppressive sadness that choked their home. That's most of it. Mark's voice pulled her from her reverie. He stood in the doorway, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. Do you want a last look around?" For a fleeting second, she saw the man she'd married in his eyes. A flicker of genuine concern. "Yes," she nodded. "I want to see her room." Amelia walked up the stairs, her hand trailing along the oak banister Mark himself had installed. Every creak of the floorboards was a memory. She paused at Maya's door, taking a deep, steadying breath before turning the knob. The room was a time capsule. Pink walls with hand-painted butterflies. A white dresser covered in glittery stickers. The small bed with its My Little Pony comforter. Only the window was different, now fitted with new locks and steel security bars, protective measures that had come 9 years too late. The grief of losing her daughter mingled with the fresh sting of betrayal, a bitter cocktail in the back of her throat. She kissed her fingertips and pressed them to the glass of a framed photo on the nightstand. "Goodbye, baby girl," she whispered. She would start over. Alone. When Amelia came downstairs, Mark had loaded the last of the boxes into her Honda Civic. He was waiting by the car, wiping his brow. They stood facing each other on the driveway, two strangers who had once shared a life. Amelia didn't want to talk. She just wanted to leave, to put this all behind her. But as she was carrying one final, dusty box from the attic, a box of her own girlhood mementos she'd decided to keep, Her foot caught on the edge of the rug. She stumbled, and the box tumbled from her arms, crashing onto the hardwood floor. Its contents spilled everywhere. Old yearbooks, faded letters, and a small, worn rag doll. The one Maya had loved to sleep with every night. The one Amelia had packed away because the sight of it was a physical pain. Before she could react, a flash of gold shot past her. Buddy, with an agility she hadn't seen in years, darted forward. He didn't pounce or tear. He gently, almost reverently, took the rag doll in his mouth. Then, without a sound, he turned, bolted out the back door, and wriggled through his familiar hole under the fence, heading straight for the Hendersons' shed. "Buddy, come back," Amelia called, her voice a mix of surprise and a strange, unidentifiable emotion. But the dog was gone. A peculiar curiosity, stronger than her exhaustion and grief, spurred her on. For the first time in years, she truly saw Buddy's actions. She walked out into the yard, squeezed through the sharp edges of the broken fence, and approached the creaking door of the shed where the old dog had disappeared. She pushed the rotting wood door open. It was dark and musty inside, with only thin slivers of light piercing through the rusted, hole-pocked roof. The smell of damp earth and old timber filled her nostrils. In the farthest corner, she saw him. Buddy was curled up beside a small nest he'd made for himself. He lifted his head and looked at her, not with fear, but with what seemed like a quiet understanding in his old, cloudy eyes. The rag doll was placed neatly beside his other treasures. Amelia sank to her knees, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears began to fall. It was a small den, lined with old rags. And arranged around it were dozens of Maya's toys, a single pink sneaker, a few of the plastic blocks Mark had bought her, a well-loved, tattered copy of Where the Wild Things Are. These were items she'd thought were lost to time, misplaced during years of numbly going through the motions. She realized, with a heart-wrenching pang, that for 9 years, Buddy had been silently collecting, guarding the last physical remnants of his little girl. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. She stroked Buddy's fur, whispering her thanks. And then, her eyes landed on it. Lying in the center of the collection, like a royal jewel, was the red and white toy cassette recorder. An inexplicable, powerful urge took hold of her. She gently picked it up, brushing away a thick layer of dust, and carried it back into her empty house. She sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of where furniture used to be. She rummaged through her junk drawer and found 2 fresh AA batteries. Her hands trembled so much she could barely get them in. She heard a faint click. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She took a deep breath and pressed the play button. First, there was only the hiss of static, the sound of time itself. Then, a voice, clear and bright and painfully familiar, filled the silence. "Testing, testing. My name is Maya Rose Peterson, and I'm 5 years old." A sob escaped Amelia's lips, raw and ragged. She clutched the recorder to her chest, as if it were Maya herself. It was her voice. Not a memory, not a dream. It was real, vibrant, and here. She let the tape play, drowning in the sound of her daughter's giggles, her nonsensical stories about preschool, about a butterfly in the garden. The pain was excruciating, but it was a beautiful, welcome pain. Then, suddenly, the background of the recording shifted. There was a shuffling noise, and then Mark's voice, more distant, but clear. His tone was strange. Not the voice of a father talking to his daughter. It was wheedling, cajoling, almost pleading. "Maya, sweetie, when you're done, come down to the princess room, okay? Remember what Daddy promised? Once we're finished, we'll go ride to Toys R Us and get you that brand new My Little Pony you want." "Ted." Amelia frowned, the tears stopping in their tracks. She hit stop, then rewind. She played it again. The princess room. The phrase echoed in her head. She had never heard it before. They didn't have a princess room. Maya's room was just Maya's room. And Maya wasn't even that into princesses. She loved dragons, unicorns, and puppies. The warmth of hearing her daughter's voice began to recede, replaced by a creeping, prickling cold. The unease began to coil in her stomach like a snake. A sharp, knife-like question pierced through the fog of her grief. What the hell was the princess room? For a few moments, Amelia tried to rationalize it. The princess room. It had to be a game, a silly nickname Mark had invented that had simply slipped her mind. After all, He'd spent more daylight hours with Maya while she worked her demanding shifts at the hospital. It was possible. Parents created fantasy worlds for their children all the time. The My Little Pony was a logical bribe for a 5-year-old. It was all logical, but the tone of his voice, that wheedling, almost cloying sweetness, it didn't sound like Mark. It felt wrong, a discordant note in the symphony of her memory. She set the recorder aside, the plastic suddenly feeling cold and alien in her hands. She had to focus. She had to finish packing, leave this house, and close this chapter. But the phrase wouldn't leave her. The princess room. It clung to her thoughts like a burr. An hour later, surrounded by sealed boxes, she realized she was missing something crucial. Her nursing license renewal documents. With the divorce proceedings and the move, she must have left them in the filing cabinet in the master bedroom. Her shift at Portland General started at 10 p.m., and the administration was notoriously strict about paperwork. Without those documents, she couldn't work. With a sigh of frustration, she pulled out her cell phone and dialed Mark's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice tinged with impatience. "Amelia? Is everything okay? I'm sorry to bother you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I think I left my nursing license paperwork in the filing cabinet. I really need it for my shift tonight. Is it all right if I come by to grab it?" There was a pause on the other end. A silence just long enough to be noticeable. I just left for my grief group session," he said, his words slightly rushed. "I won't be back until late." For the past 9 years, Mark's Tuesday night grief counseling group had been a constant, one of the few routines that had survived the cataclysm of Maya's disappearance. It was run by a kind, dedicated therapist named Mrs. Jansen, who had been a rock for them in the early days. Amelia had stopped going after 2 years. Reliving the trauma week after week had become unbearable. But Mark had never missed a session. "The sun is just setting, Mark. Your group doesn't start for another hour," Amelia pointed out, glancing out the window of her new, sterile apartment. "Right. I'm picking up Matthew on the way," he stammered. "Matthew Tinko, his best friend since high school. You know he lives all the way across town. We're going together." The explanation was too detailed, too quick. It was the same tone she'd heard when he'd lied about working late, back when she suspected he was cheating but couldn't yet bring herself to believe it. "Okay," she said slowly. Could I just use my old key to get in? I'll be quick and lock up on my way out." "Of course," he said, his voice now sounding relieved. "You know where everything is. Just be careful." "I will. Thanks, Mark." She hung up, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. He was lying. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. But why lie about therapy? 15 minutes later, she pulled into the familiar driveway. The house stood dark against the bruised twilight sky, a hollow shell of the life they once had. The old house key felt foreign in her hand, a relic from a past she was supposed to be leaving behind. She let herself in, the click of the lock echoing in the cavernous silence. She flipped on the lights, her footsteps sounding unnaturally loud on the hardwood floors. She went straight upstairs to the master bedroom. His bedroom now, she corrected herself. The filing cabinet was in its usual corner. She opened the drawer labeled Professional Documents and found the manila folder right where it should be. Relief washed over her. At least this wouldn't complicate her job. She tucked the folder under her arm and turned to leave. As she did, she was startled by the sharp ring of the landline phone downstairs. She instinctively moved to answer it, her hand halfway to the door before she stopped herself. "It's not your house anymore. It's not your business." She waited. The phone rang 3 more times, then stopped. The answering machine clicked on, and Mark's recorded voice filled the empty house. "You've reached the Peterson residence. Please leave a message." A woman's voice followed, warm but laced with concern. "Mark, this is Eleanor Jansen from the support group. I'm calling because I wanted to check in. We need to discuss your attendance. You've missed 3 consecutive sessions now, and a few of the members have expressed their concern. That's 3 weeks, Mark. Please, give me a call when you can." Amelia froze, her hand gripping the doorframe. 3 weeks. He hadn't just been late. He hadn't been going at all. For at least 3 weeks, he had been lying, leaving the house every Tuesday night and going, where? The words from the tape recorder screamed in her mind. The princess room. A wave of nausea washed over her. This wasn't just about a failing marriage or a petty lie anymore. This was something else. Something dark and hidden right under her nose for years. The comfortable silence they had worked in just hours ago now felt sinister, a carefully constructed facade. She stood there for a long time in the silent, empty house, the folder with her nursing license clutched to her chest like a shield. The pieces of a puzzle she never knew existed were beginning to surface, and she had a terrifying feeling that she was not going to like the picture they formed. The lie hung in the air, thick and suffocating. 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, Mark had been vanishing into the night, cloaked in the respectable alibi of grief counseling. The foundation of what little trust Amelia had left in him crumbled into dust. Her mind raced, trying to connect the dots. The strange phrase on the tape. The lie about therapy. Where did Matthew Tinko fit into all of this? Mark had used him as part of his alibi tonight. Were they together? A cold dread began to seep into her bones, a primal fear that went beyond marital betrayal. She needed to get out. The house suddenly felt like a trap, its familiar walls closing in on her. She turned to leave, but as she passed Maya's room, she hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, just as she'd left it. Drawn by an impulse she couldn't explain, she pushed it open and stepped inside one last time. The room was still and silent, a shrine to a lost childhood. Without the boxes of toys she'd packed earlier, it looked larger, emptier. Her eyes scanned the pink walls, the butterfly decals, the small white dresser. Everything was exactly as it had been. She walked towards the antique wardrobe that stood against the far wall, a heavy piece of oak they'd bought at a flea market years ago. As she passed it, her hip brushed against its corner. The massive wardrobe wobbled precariously. Startled, she reached out to steady it. It tilted forward, and she saw that its front left foot was not touching the floor. The floorboards beneath it had warped slightly over the years, a common problem in old Portland houses, especially in a room that had been kept closed up for so long. She pushed it back against the wall, but it immediately listed forward again. She couldn't just leave it like this. It was a safety hazard. If it fell in the middle of the night, it could startle Mark, or worse. An image of him waking up, thinking someone had broken in, flashed through her mind. The last thing he needed was another scare. A bitter, ironic thought. She glanced at her watch. Still an hour before her shift. Harrison's Hardware stayed open late. She could grab a few wooden shims, level the wardrobe quickly, and still make it to work on time. It was a simple, practical task, a welcome distraction from the toxic thoughts swirling in her head. Just as she was about to head downstairs, she heard a noise. A faint scraping sound from the first floor. "Mark?" she called out, her voice uncertain. Silence. She held her breath, listening. Maybe it was just the old house settling. But then she heard it again, louder this time. The distinct sound of a drawer being pulled open, then slammed shut. Her heart leaped into her throat. Mark had said he wouldn't be back until late. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling slightly. More frantic sounds from downstairs. The rustle of papers, a heavy thud, as if a stack of books had been knocked over. This wasn't the house settling. Someone was in the house, and they were in Mark's office. Adrenaline surged through her. She backed away from Maya's doorway, her mind racing through options. Her cell phone was in her purse, downstairs on the entryway table. The landline was also downstairs. She was trapped on the second floor. Then she heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, clumsy, and fast. Panic seized her. She looked around Maya's room for a weapon, her eyes landing on a heavy ceramic lamp shaped like a smiling elephant. She grabbed it, its weight a small comfort in her trembling hands. She flattened herself against the wall next to the doorway, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and pounded down the hallway. They didn't belong to Mark. They were too erratic, too desperate. The person stormed past Maya's room and burst into the master bedroom at the end of the hall. Amelia heard more frantic searching, drawers being wrenched open, a curse muttered under a man's breath. He's looking for something. Summoning every ounce of courage she possessed, Amelia peeked around the doorframe. And her blood ran cold. It was Matthew Tinko, but it wasn't the quiet, mild-mannered Matthew she knew. The man who carved wooden animals for Maya. The man who helped Mark build their deck one summer. His face was pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wide and pupils dilated into black pools of madness. He was tearing the room apart, his movements jerky and violent. He looked like an animal, cornered and rabid. "Matthew." The name escaped her lips in a choked whisper. He froze. His head snapped in her direction. His eyes, devoid of recognition, locked onto hers. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "Matthew, what are you doing here?" she said, trying to keep her voice firm despite the terror clawing at her throat. "Mark said he was with you." He didn't answer. He took a step toward her, then another, his movements unsteady. The acrid smell of sweat and something else, alcohol or chemicals, reached her from across the hall. This wasn't just a burglary. This was something else entirely. "Stay back," she warned, raising the ceramic lamp. "I'm calling the police." Her threat seemed to enrage him. With a guttural roar, he lunged. Amelia screamed and scrambled back into Maya's room, trying to slam the door shut. But he was too strong. He threw his shoulder against the door, splintering the frame, and burst in after her. She swung the lamp with all her might, but he batted it away. It flew across the room and shattered against the wall. He grabbed her by the arms, his grip like iron vices. "Let go of me," she shrieked, struggling against him. He was grunting, his breath hot and foul on her face as he tried to back her into a corner. She fought back, kicking, scratching, using her nurse's knowledge of pressure points to jab at his neck and collarbone. He grunted in pain but didn't release her. He was trying to drag her towards the bed. A fresh wave of terror, cold and absolute, washed over her. She knew what he wanted. In a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, she stomped down hard on his instep with her heel. He roared in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening she needed. She wrenched free and shoved him with all her strength. He stumbled backward, disoriented, crashing directly into the unstable wardrobe. The heavy oak piece teetered for a horrifying moment. Then, with a deafening groan of tortured wood, it toppled forward. Amelia threw herself to the side as the wardrobe crashed onto the floor with the force of a falling tree. The impact shook the entire room. Wood splintered, but it wasn't just the wardrobe that broke. The floorboards beneath it, already weakened and warped, cracked and gave way under the immense weight. A section of the floor collapsed, revealing a dark, gaping hole. As the dust settled, Amelia stared, breathless and terrified, into the cavity. It wasn't the crawl space. It wasn't insulation and support beams. It was a man-made compartment. And inside, stacked neatly in row after row, were dozens of cardboard boxes. Matthew's demeanor changed in an instant. The violent rage vanished, replaced by a greedy, triumphant grin. "There it is," he rasped, his eyes gleaming with a disturbing light. Finally, he scrambled to his knees and began grabbing the boxes, pulling out what was inside. VHS tapes and VCDs, hundreds of them. He shoved them into his arms, his movements frantic and desperate. Amelia, still dazed, watched in horror and confusion. What were these? Why were they hidden under her daughter's bedroom floor? The name on the nearest cassette label, scrawled in Mark's neat, familiar handwriting, seared itself into her brain. Princess Room, Volume 47. The world tilted on its axis. "Stop," she screamed, lunging for him, trying to stop him from taking whatever this poison was. Her hands knocked several tapes from his clumsy grasp, and they clattered across the broken floor. Matthew cursed, scooped up as many as he could carry, and shoved past her. He ran from the room, his footsteps thundering down the stairs. "I'm calling the police," Amelia shouted after him, her voice a raw, broken thing. She heard the front door slam shut. Through the window, she saw Matthew staggering down the driveway, clutching his stolen tapes to his chest like a profane treasure. He didn't look back. She was left alone in the wreckage of her daughter's room, staring at the hole in the floor and the terrible secrets it had held for 9 long years. The slam of the front door echoed Matthew's frantic escape, leaving a silence in the house that was heavier and more terrifying than the violence that had preceded it. Amelia stood frozen in the wrecked bedroom, her body a single, trembling nerve. The overturned wardrobe, the shattered lamp, the splintered doorframe, they were just props on a stage. The real horror was the hole. The dark, gaping maw in the floor that had vomited up a secret so vile she couldn't yet comprehend it. "Princess Room, Princess Room, Princess Room." The innocent phrase from the toy recorder had become a venomous chant in her mind. Her first instinct was to run, but a stronger, fiercer impulse took hold. She stumbled out of the ruined room, her legs like jelly, and snatched her purse from the entryway table. Her fumbling fingers struggled to dial 911. The dispatcher's calm, professional voice was an anchor in her sea of panic. 911, what is your emergency? I need the police. Amelia stammered, her voice cracking. At 4728 Elm Street. A man, he broke in. He attacked me. His name is Matthew Tenko. Her eyes were fixed on the top of the stairs, on the darkness of the hallway that led back to the hole. The dispatcher asked her a series of questions. Was she injured? Was the man still there? Amelia answered mechanically, her mind a maelstrom of confusion and horror. Ma'am, officers are on their way, the dispatcher assured her. Stay on the line with me until they arrive. The wail of sirens grew from a distant cry to a neighborhood-shattering scream. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt in the driveway, their flashing red and blue lights painting the walls of the house in frantic, terrifying strokes. A man in plain clothes, his face etched with the weary competence of a career detective, introduced himself as Detective Morrison. He was in his mid-50s, with kind eyes that seemed to have seen far too much of the world's darkness. Can you tell me what happened? He asked gently. Amelia told him everything. Finding Matthew, the assault, the wardrobe falling, and the revelation of the hidden tapes. Morrison listened intently, his expression growing more grim with every word. He knelt, picking up one of the dropped cassettes with a gloved hand. He read the label, his expression hardening. This phrase, Princess Room. What does it mean to you, Mrs. Peterson? I don't know, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I heard it for the first time today, on an old tape recorder of my daughter's. Maya, my daughter, went missing 9 years ago. From this room. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Morrison's eyes, full of professional sympathy a moment ago, now sharpened with a new, urgent intensity. He exchanged a look with one of his officers, a silent communication that sent a shiver down Amelia's spine. Ma'am, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I think we need to see what's on these. They moved downstairs to the living room. Amelia's hands trembled as she slid a VCD from its case, Princess Room, Volume 12, and inserted it into the player. The screen flickered to life. Grainy, home video footage of Mark and a 5-year-old Maya in their living room, playing with blocks. Maya's bright, joyful laughter filled the air, the same sound from the toy recorder. That's from a few months before she disappeared, Amelia whispered, a fresh wave of tears blurring her vision. On the screen, Mark smiled at the person holding the camera. Then he turned to his daughter. Maya, sweetie, want to play a game? A special, surprise game? I need you to go down to the princess room and wait for me. Okay, Daddy, Maya chirped, jumping to her feet and running off camera. Her small footsteps could be heard heading downstairs, towards the basement. The video cut abruptly. When the image returned, the setting had changed. It was a room Amelia had never seen before. The walls were painted a sickly sweet pink, and on a small mattress on the floor, covered in Disney princess sheets, sat Maya. She was wearing a tiny, 2-piece swimsuit, one far too adult for a 5-year-old. She looked uncomfortable, confused, her small brow furrowed. Now, pose for Daddy, Mark's voice said, distorted and strange, from behind the camera. A guttural scream tore from Amelia's throat, a sound of pure, primal horror. Stop, she shrieked, scrambling for the remote. Turn it off. Oh God, turn it off. Detective Morrison lunged forward and hit the power button, plunging the room into blessed darkness. Amelia collapsed onto the sofa, her body convulsing with violent, racking sobs. The man she had loved, the man she had built a life with. He was a monster. Morrison sat beside her, his voice gentle but firm, cutting through her haze of grief. Mrs. Peterson, Amelia, I need you to listen to me. I need you to think. The basement. Is there any possibility that room is in the basement? Amelia's head snapped up, her tear-filled eyes wide with a new, unthinkable thought. The basement door, it's always locked. He has the only key. He said it was for safety, to keep his power tools secure from a child. An officer rushed into the room. Detective, I just got off the phone with Mrs. Jansen, the grief group therapist. Mark Peterson hasn't attended a session in 3 weeks. He's not there tonight. Morrison stood up, his face a mask of cold fury. That's it. That's probable cause. He turned to his officers, his voice ringing with authority. Get the breaching tools from the car. We're going through that basement door. Now. Amelia stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. 9 years. 9 years of not knowing, of grieving a ghost, of slowly, painfully accepting that her daughter was gone forever. Could the answer have been right here, all this time, beneath her feet? The solid oak door to the basement was a testament to Mark's craftsmanship and to his deceit. It took 4 bone-jarring impacts from the police battering ram before the frame splintered and the deadbolt lock finally gave way with a sickening crack. The door flew open, revealing a set of steep wooden stairs descending into a cold, fluorescent-lit space. "Clear," an officer shouted from the bottom after a tense minute. Morrison led the way down, his weapon drawn. Amelia followed close behind, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she felt dizzy. The basement looked exactly as she remembered it, a picture of suburban order. Mark's workbench was immaculate, with tools hanging in perfect rows on a pegboard. Shelves held meticulously labeled boxes of screws, nails, and hardware. The washer and dryer hummed quietly in a corner. It was a perfect, ordinary space. It was a perfect lie. "Search everything," Morrison commanded, his voice tight. "Look for a false wall, a hidden door, anything out of place." His team spread out, tapping on walls, moving aside heavy tool chests, checking behind the water heater. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each one a small agony for Amelia. Despair, a familiar old friend, began to creep back into her heart. What if the room wasn't here? What if it was somewhere else, another location she'd never known about? Then she remembered the hardware store, a conversation that felt like it had happened in another lifetime. The clerk mentioning Mark's renovation project. This had to be it. "Check under the appliances," she urged, her voice strained. The washer, the dryer. He'd hide it somewhere no one would ever think to look. It took 3 officers to heave the heavy washing machine away from the wall. And there it was. Not a door, but a subtle, almost imperceptible seam in the drywall. The texture was just slightly different from the rest of the wall, a masterful piece of deception designed to be hidden in plain sight. An officer ran his fingers along the edge and found a tiny, recessed latch near the floor. It was locked. An officer handed Morrison a crowbar. With a screech of protesting metal, the lock snapped. The panel swung inward, revealing not a room, but a narrow, soundproofed passageway stretching into the darkness. A string of pink fairy lights was tacked to the ceiling, currently unplugged. The air that drifted out was stale, musty, smelling of uncirculated air and something else, the faint, unmistakable scent of human occupation in a confined space. Morrison found the plug, connected the lights, and the corridor was bathed in a sickly pink glow. He drew his weapon again and entered, his team following in single file. The passage ran for about 20 feet before ending at another door. This one was painted bright pink and decorated with faded princess stickers. Morrison knocked firmly. "Portland Police. Open the door." Silence. He pressed his ear to the wood, but heard nothing. The soundproofing was absolute. He raised his fist to knock again, when a small click echoed from the other side. The door creaked open a few inches. A young voice, thin and reedy, a voice that was no longer a child's but not yet a woman's, called out cheerfully. "Daddy? You're home early." The door swung wider. A teenage girl stood there, blinking in the sudden intrusion of new faces and harsh light. She was rail-thin and pale, with long, tangled blonde hair that fell past her shoulders. She wore a simple, faded pink nightgown. Her smile, bright and genuine a moment ago, froze on her face as she saw Morrison's uniform and the other armed officers behind him. This wasn't her father. A scream tore from her throat, high and terrified. She stumbled backward into the small room, her hands flying up to cover her face. No, you're not real," Daddy said. Daddy said everyone else was dead." Amelia pushed past the officers, her heart exploding in her chest. 9 years. The face was thinner, the body taller, but the eyes, those large, startlingly blue eyes, were the same. She knew her daughter instantly. "Maya," she breathed, the name a prayer on her lips. She rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. "Oh God, Maya. It's Mommy. It's me, baby." The girl, her daughter, pressed herself against the far wall of the tiny room, shaking her head violently. "No, my mommy's dead. Everyone died. Dad said the world ended, and it was just us. He said we were safe here. Amelia dropped to her knees on the cold concrete floor, holding her arms out. No, sweetheart. That's not true. He lied. I've been looking for you all this time. I never, ever stopped looking for you. Daddy, Maya screamed, her eyes darting around wildly for an escape that didn't exist. Daddy, help me. Where are you? Please, Amelia begged, her own voice breaking. Look at me, Maya. Really look at me. Morrison quietly motioned his officers to stay back, giving them a sliver of space. He pulled a pen from his pocket and discreetly handed it to Amelia. Understanding instantly, Amelia took the pen. With a trembling hand, she began to draw on the back of her own hand. A simple butterfly with a smiley face for a body. The same design she'd drawn on Maya's hand countless times when she was small, a little ritual they shared. Remember this? She said softly, holding her hand out for Maya to see. You used to ask me to draw it every time the old one washed off. You called it your happy butterfly. Maya's terrified eyes fixed on the drawing. Her frantic breathing began to slow. A flicker of recognition, a tiny spark in the vast darkness of her confusion, began to glow. Her gaze lifted from the drawing to Amelia's face, truly seeing her for the first time. Mommy. The word was a broken, uncertain whisper. But, Daddy said. I know what he said, darling. Amelia choked out, her own tears falling freely. But he lied about everything. I'm here. I'm real. She opened her arms again. This time, Maya flew into them. They clung to each other on the floor of that horrific pink prison, mother and daughter, both sobbing, their shared grief and love a raw, powerful force in the small, stale room. Amelia buried her face in her daughter's tangled hair, breathing in her scent, feeling the solid, living warmth of her body. She was alive. After 9 years of a living hell, her daughter was alive and in her arms. The hours that followed the rescue were a blur of sterile hospital rooms, gentle-voiced paramedics, and the quiet, procedural hum of the police station. Maya clung to Amelia's side, a frightened child in a teenager's body, overwhelmed by the sudden, violent expansion of her world. The sky, the trees, the sheer number of cars and people, it was all too much. She flinched at every new sound, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and wonder. They were given a quiet room at the station while the initial chaos of the investigation swirled around them. A kind woman from Child Protective Services named Sarah Martinez stayed with them, providing blankets and cups of lukewarm tea. After the initial, raw emotion of their reunion, a strange new reality began to set in. Amelia watched her daughter, cataloging the changes 9 years in a cage had wrought. She was malnourished, her skin unnaturally pale from lack of sunlight. But the deepest wounds weren't visible. He said there was a war, Maya repeated for the 3rd time, her voice a monotone whisper as she stared at the floor. Nuclear bombs. He said we were the only ones left, that he'd saved me. He said it was our job to start the world over again. She looked up at Amelia, her blue eyes clouded with a chillingly adult resignation. He said I had to have a baby to save the human race. I tried, Mommy. I really tried. But it never happened. I thought I was failing. The words were like tiny shards of glass lodging themselves in Amelia's heart. She held her daughter tighter, trying to project a calm she was nowhere near feeling. It wasn't your job, sweetheart. It was never your job. The investigation was moving at lightning speed. Mark and Matthew had been apprehended at Matthew's house across town, caught in the act of trying to destroy the stolen tapes. They hadn't gotten far. Other arrests were being made. The Family Sanctum Fellowship, as they called themselves, was being dismantled piece by piece. Morrison kept Amelia updated in brief, grim-faced reports. But as the initial shock wore off, Amelia noticed a troubling pattern in Maya. In their conversations, and later, in the preliminary interviews with a child psychologist, Maya's story had inconsistencies. She was clear about the lies Mark had told her about the end of the world. She was clear about the abuse. But whenever the topic turned to the other men, the other faces that must have appeared in that room over the years, the other members of Mark's sick club, her memory would suddenly become hazy. There was no one else, she would insist, her voice becoming small and defensive. It was just Daddy. He showed me movies sometimes. He said the other people were just actors. She was reciting a script, a lie that had been drilled into her for so long it had become her truth. The police had video evidence of at least 3 other men in the princess room, at various times. But Maya would not, or could not, acknowledge them. She was protecting him. Or, Amelia realized with a sickening lurch, she was protecting herself from a truth even more complex than the one she was already facing. The first few nights in their temporary, sterile apartment were sleepless. Maya was plagued by horrific nightmares. She would thrash in her bed, crying out in a sleep-thickened voice. Amelia would rush to her side, holding her until the trembling subsided. It was on the third night that she heard the name. Maya was whimpering, caught in the throes of a bad dream. "No, don't go," she mumbled, her hands clutching at the blankets. "It's cold. Lily, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Lily." The name hung in the quiet darkness of the room. It wasn't a name Amelia had ever heard before. It wasn't a friend from Maya's long-ago preschool days. It felt new. It felt important. The next day, the psychologist gave Maya a sketch pad and some colored pencils, a tool to help her process trauma she couldn't yet verbalize. For hours, Maya sat at the kitchen table, drawing with a fierce, silent concentration. When she was done, she pushed the pad away and retreated to her room. Amelia walked over and looked at the drawings. There were several. Most were dark, chaotic scribbles. But one was startlingly clear. It depicted two girls inside a pink, box-like room. One girl had long, blonde hair, clearly Maya. She was holding hands with a smaller girl with short, dark hair. The blonde girl was smiling, a forced, pained smile. The dark-haired girl was crying, her face a mask of terror. Underneath the drawing of the dark-haired girl, in shaky, childish letters, was a single word: Lily. Amelia sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. This was it. This was the secret inside the secret. The reason for Maya's memory blocks, for her fierce, unconscious protection of Mark's larger world. It wasn't just about her. She knew then that she couldn't rely on the police or the therapists to uncover this. They were following procedure, moving carefully. But this was a mother's territory. She had to find a way to break through the wall of pain and guilt her daughter had built around herself, not by forcing it, but by providing a safety so absolute that the truth would finally feel safe enough to emerge. That evening, as she was tucking Maya into bed, she sat on the edge of the mattress. She didn't ask about the drawing. She didn't mention the name. Instead, she took Maya's small, thin hand in her own. "You know," she said softly, stroking her daughter's hair, "Buddy misses you a lot. The detective said we can probably bring him here tomorrow. He's been waiting for you for a very long time." For the first time all day, a genuine light flickered in Maya's clouded eyes. "Buddy," she whispered, the name a soft, hopeful sound. "He's still alive?" "Yes, baby," Amelia said, her heart aching. "He's still alive. And he never forgot you." It wasn't a strategy. It was the truth. But as she saw the small, hopeful shift in her daughter's expression, she realized it might also be the key. The arrival of Buddy was a turning point. The old dog became Maya's furry anchor in a world that was still too loud and too bright. His constant, silent presence seemed to soothe a part of her that no human could reach. The nightmares, while not gone, became less frequent. Amelia watched, her heart aching with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow, and she continued her quiet campaign of patience. She didn't push. She didn't pry. The drawings continued. The figure of the small, dark-haired girl appeared again and again, a silent ghost haunting the pages of the sketchpad. The breakthrough came nearly 2 weeks after the rescue, not in a sterile therapy office, but in the quiet of their own living room. It was a rainy Portland afternoon. Maya was on the floor, sketching, while Buddy dozed with his head in her lap. Amelia was pretending to read on the couch, but she was watching her daughter. Maya had been drawing the same image for days, the two girls in the pink room. But this time, something was different. She was adding a new detail to the background, a small ventilation grate near the ceiling. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" Amelia asked gently, her voice carefully neutral. Maya's hand stilled. She looked at the drawing, her expression clouded. "Sometimes I wish I couldn't remember," she whispered. This was it, the opening. Amelia slid off the couch and sat on the floor beside her. "It's okay to remember, Maya. And it's okay to be sad or angry about what you remember. Nothing you feel is wrong." Tears began to well in Maya's eyes. "It's not just sad," she choked out, her voice thick with a guilt that was far too heavy for her small shoulders. "It's bad. I was bad." "No," Amelia said firmly, her heart breaking. You were a child. Nothing you did was bad. But I didn't help her. The words burst out of her, a torrent of pain held back for 2 long years. Lily. She was so scared. Daddy brought her there. He said she was my new sister, and I had to teach her the rules. Amelia listened, her own tears silently tracing paths down her cheeks, as the full, horrific story poured out. A smaller, younger girl named Lily. A desperate escape through the ventilation duct. And Maya, frozen by fear, watching her go and doing nothing. When Daddy came back, he was so angry, Maya sobbed, burying her face in her hands. He said I was a bad sister. He said I let her go die in the dead world. He hurt me for it. It was my fault, Mommy. I let her go. The confession, raw and agonizing, hung in the silent room. It was the source of her nightmares, the root of her guilt. She wasn't just a victim. In her own mind, she had been an accomplice. Amelia wrapped her arms around her daughter, rocking her back and forth as she sobbed. No, baby. No, she whispered fiercely. It was not your fault. You were a prisoner, just like she was. You did the only thing you could to survive. You survived. That is a miracle. She held her daughter, letting her cry out all the pain, all the guilt, all the fear she had carried alone in the dark for 2 years. The secret was out, and as horrific as it was, Amelia felt a sliver of light pierce through the darkness. Now, at last, the real healing could begin. And now, she had a name for the police. A name that could bring down Mark's entire world. After Amelia left the therapy center, her mind reeling but her purpose clear, she called Detective Morrison. She relayed the story Maya had confessed through sobs, a second girl, an escape through a vent, a crushing burden of guilt. A new, ferocious energy pulsed through the investigation. It was no longer just about dismantling a network of predators sharing vile material. It was now a hunt to uncover the fate of a second child. This was about kidnapping, possibly murder. Morrison's team worked around the clock, cross-referencing missing children reports from the entire Pacific Northwest over the past 3 years. The parameters were specific. A female child, approximately 6 to 7 years old, who went missing roughly 2 years ago. For 2 agonizing days, the search yielded nothing. Amelia's hope, a fragile, newborn thing, began to fray. She held Maya, reassured her that she was brave and strong, but inside, a cold fear grew. Had Lily ever been officially reported missing? Was she a child from a broken home that no one had bothered to look for? The thought was a cold stone in her stomach. Meanwhile, Mark Peterson remained a stone wall of arrogant calm in the interrogation room. He denied any knowledge of a Lily, dismissing it as the fantasy of a traumatized child his ex-wife was manipulating. You're desperate, detective, he'd sneer. You have nothing. The breakthrough came on the 3rd day. A tech analyst, painstakingly going through the terabytes of data from Mark's seized computers, found a corrupted audio folder. After hours of work, he managed to clean up one of the files. It wasn't a video from the princess room, but a recording from inside a car. It was Mark's voice, speaking to himself as if dictating a note, laced with a familiar, chilling frustration. She's not like Maya. The voice on the recording hissed. This one remembers. She keeps asking for her mommy. Cries all the damn time. It's ruining the aesthetic. This was the proof they needed that another child existed. But it was the file name that cracked the case wide open. L.chun_audio_test1.wave. Chun. With a last name, the search narrowed instantly. Within an hour, they had it. Lily Chun, 6 years old, had vanished from a playground in a suburb south of Portland 2.5 years ago. For 3 agonizing months, her parents had lived every family's worst nightmare. Then, one morning, she was found wandering in a daze near a highway rest stop 50 miles away. She was malnourished, terrified, and suffering from what doctors diagnosed as dissociative amnesia. She couldn't remember where she had been or who had taken her. With no leads, her case had gone cold. Until now. Morrison knew he had one chance to break Mark Peterson completely. He didn't want a trial where slick lawyers could twist Maya's trauma into a question of reliability. He wanted a confession that would bury Mark and his entire fellowship. He walked into the sterile interrogation room. Mark sat there, looking as composed as ever, a faint, mocking smile on his lips. Morrison didn't say a word. He simply took a single 8 by 10 photograph from a manila folder and slid it across the metal table. It was a school picture of a smiling, bright-eyed little girl with short, dark hair. Underneath, it was her name, Lily Chun. Mark glanced at the photo. For the first time in all their sessions, a genuine emotion flickered across his face. Not fear, not guilt, but pure, unadulterated annoyance. It was the look of a master artist whose flawed work had just been put on public display. She was a mistake, Mark said, his voice a low, dismissive hiss. She didn't understand the project. She had no appreciation for the art. The art, Morrison repeated, his own voice dangerously quiet. What I was creating with Maya was pure, Mark said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with a fanatic's light. A bond, a world of our own. Lily, she was an impurity, a failed experiment. She ruined the narrative. So you just threw her away? Dumped her on the side of a highway like a piece of trash? Mark shrugged, a gesture of such casual cruelty that it made the detective's stomach turn. She was useless to me. She wouldn't stop crying. It was affecting Maya's performance. Performance. The word hung in the air, a final, damning testament to his depravity. He saw his own daughter not as a child, but as an actress in his sick, private film. With the evidence of Lily Chun laid bare, Morrison pressed his advantage. He laid out the audio file, the matching dates of Lily's disappearance and reappearance, and the most powerful weapon of all, Maya's testimony. The smug mask shattered completely, revealing the pathetic, terrified monster beneath. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a sullen, petulant resentment. He knew the game was over. He began to talk. He gave them names. He gave them dates. He described how he would reward his most loyal followers with private viewings. He confessed to drugging Lily to keep her quiet and to dumping her when she became too much of a liability. He laid out the entire, sordid structure of his fellowship, not with remorse, but with the detached pride of a CEO describing a failed business venture. The final domino had fallen. That evening, Morrison called Amelia. His voice was heavy, but resolute. "We found her," he said. "Lily Chun. She's alive, Amelia. She's living with her family. They were told she had amnesia, but now they have answers. And we have Mark Peterson on everything. Conspiracy, kidnapping, abuse, everything. He's not getting out. Not ever." Amelia closed her eyes, a wave of relief so profound it almost brought her to her knees. It wasn't just her daughter he had stolen. He had stolen a piece of another family, too. And now, they all had a chance to heal. The trial was a media circus, a spectacle of whispered headlines and grim-faced reporters camped outside the courthouse. But for Amelia and Maya, it was a distant noise. On the advice of the prosecutors and Dr. Evans, they didn't attend. Maya's testimony was delivered via a recorded deposition, a process that was agonizing but necessary, protecting her from the trauma of facing her tormentor in open court. The verdicts came swiftly. Life without the possibility of parole for Mark Peterson. Decades-long sentences for Matthew Tinko and the other core members. Justice, in its cold, procedural way, had been served. But justice didn't erase the scars. The months that followed were a quiet, painstaking exercise in rebuilding a life from ashes. They moved out of the temporary apartment and into a small, two-bedroom house with a sun-drenched garden in a different part of Portland, a place with no ghosts. Buddy claimed the sunniest spot on the living room rug as his own. Healing was not a straight line. It was a landscape of peaks and valleys. There were good days, filled with the small miracles of normalcy. Maya laughing at a silly movie, her excitement over learning how to use a computer, the simple joy of walking with Buddy in the park without looking over her shoulder. And there were bad days. Days when a certain shade of pink would send Maya into a silent, withdrawn state. Days when a slammed door would make her flinch. Nights when the old nightmares would return, and Amelia would hold her daughter until the shaking stopped, her own heart aching with a helpless love. The guilt over Lily remained Maya's heaviest burden. Dr. Evans worked with her tirelessly, helping her understand that she was not a monster, but a child who had been forced to make an impossible choice in an impossible situation. 6 months after the trial, they received a letter. It was from the Chin family. They had followed the case, and the detectives had explained Maya's role in their daughter's story. They didn't write with anger or blame. They wrote with a quiet, profound gratitude. "Our Lily doesn't remember the details of her escape," the letter read, "but we know she was not alone in that place. The detectives told us what you told them. You gave us the answers we thought we would never have. In our hearts, we believe you were the first person who helped her find her way home. We wish you peace on your own journey to healing." Maya read the letter twice, her silent tears dripping onto the paper. They were not tears of guilt or sorrow. They were tears of release. That evening, as twilight settled over their small garden, Amelia watched her daughter through the kitchen window. Maya, now 16, was throwing a tennis ball for Buddy. The old dog, slower now, but his spirit bright, happily trotted after it. Her laughter, a sound Amelia had once thought she would never hear again, drifted in through the open window, clear and free. The scars were still there. Amelia knew they would always be a part of their story, faint, silvery lines that mapped out where they had been broken and how they had healed. The monster was locked away, but the memory of the pink room would never truly fade. But as she watched her daughter playing with the faithful old dog who had guarded her memory in the dark, Amelia understood. Mark had tried to create a world of his own, a twisted narrative of control and fear. But he had failed. He couldn't extinguish the fierce, resilient light in his daughter's soul. He couldn't erase the unconditional love of a mother or the unwavering loyalty of a good dog. The road ahead was long, but they would walk it together, one step at a time. The road home. What did you think of Amelia's journey? Would you have done anything differently if you were in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story made you think or feel something, don't forget to leave a like, share it with someone you think it will touch, and subscribe so you don't miss the next mystery. I'll see you in the next story, and who knows, maybe next time, you'll be the one to uncover a buried truth.